Hi there, it's Ron Gula with another episode of the Gula Tech Cyber Fiction Show. Sorry we haven't been recording these in a while. I'm recovering from elective shoulder surgery and I enjoyed the holiday season. So Happy New Year to everybody. Today we are going to be discussing the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, CMMC. Yet one of those acronyms that everybody can say, but not everybody knows exactly what it means. Well, today I'm lucky enough, I've got some experts from Edwards Performance Solutions.
That's right.
Solutions. I always say performance consulting, but it's performance solutions. So today we got Brian Hubbard with us and Joy Beland.
Yep.
Great. How are you guys doing?
Doing great.
Yeah, this is fun.
How long have you guys been at Edwards?
So I've been with Edwards for 5 years.
Excellent.
And, I'm working on the director of commercial and cybersecurity. And and 37 years in cybersecurity. So it's the next stage in my career. So it's been fun.
Excellent. And Joy, how long have you been with Edwards?
Just over a year now.
Where were you before Edwards?
I had my own MSP, which is a managed service provider, in Los Angeles for 21 years. And I left there. I joined a cybersecurity vendor in the MSP community for almost 2 years, and then I came to Edwards.
So you come from the MSP space. That's excellent.
I do, yeah.
And I got to ask, if you're doing MSP in LA, did you have like Brad Pitt, all these other people as clients?
I hate to say this, but I wouldn't necessarily want them as clients. I did very well with the small and medium business that were professional services firms.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Now, we met at a holiday party, a Howard County Economic Development Authority event, which is always fun. You guys are great supporters of the local community here in Maryland, but cyber is a national thing, right? And there's nothing more national right now than protecting the defense industrial base and the 300,000 defense contractors that are out there with more cyber stuff, right? So how did you guys get involved doing CMMC?
Well, so when I started with Edwards, 5 years ago, we were really focused on helping organizations with their overall cybersecurity program. So we used something called the cybersecurity framework. So that we were kind of focused on that and helping them structure their programs and get them rolling. And through that whole time, the Department of Defense had, the DFARS, the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulations, had a clause that was called 7012. Won't do all the long number scheme that they have, but it's 7012. And that required companies to actually be compliant with NIST 800-171, special publication that NIST published. That was a derivative of the bigger NIST 853, if people know what that is. I know we're throwing a lot of numbers out, but it had been around since 2014. So companies that had this clause, and it's mainly targeted at companies that provide support for contracts that require processing of what's called controlled unclassified information. So it's still unclassified information, but it's more sensitive, right? So it's stuff that they don't want out in the public without prior public release authority. So, and the problem has been that the defense industrial base is leaking like a sieve, right? That organizations are getting into this information, and our competitors, foreign other countries, China, Russia, all of them have.
Canada's coming after us.
I suppose so. And they've been beating us to market, right? So, one of the great things was it was a brand new strike fighter, right? That China showed it at an air show before we even had it off the production line. It was our design, right? So all of that came out through the defense contracting base. That's how they got the information. So they put this program in place, the DFARS, and it was a voluntary program. So you had it in your contract, so you had to attest that you had assessed yourself against this NIST standard, but there really was no enforcement mechanism. There was no way to say that, company A, who might have spent, hundreds of thousands of dollars and done it right, was competing against company B, who did absolutely nothing, just said, yeah, I'm good. Yeah.
Well, I'll even go a step further. So when I used to run Tenable Network Security, we would have companies come in and say, hey, I'm good. I patched all my vulnerabilities. I'm compliant across it. But was that point in time? Was it continuous? Right. It was really difficult to assess programs versus that. Now, Joy, your background with MSPs, are you trying to help MSPs assess against the CMMC standard? We'll get more into what CMC is and how that is different in a second.
Well, the first thing is I'm trying to help them understand what their role is in it. I think with some new documentation that came out recently on scoping it actually identifies the managed service provider as a security protection asset. So they have their own category that they need to be assisting their clients. Previous to that scoping guidance coming out, it was really unclear if an MSP is going to provide some or all of the security for a organization that's in the defense industrial base. They weren't sure what they needed to do to participate in this, and a lot of them were looking at the list of the 110 controls without digging deeper into each of the assessment objectives and really how are they going to provide that evidence to an assessor or report it correctly if they're doing the self-attestation. They were looking at the list as like check marks. Oh, we do that, we do that, we do that, and not worrying about it. It's a lot deeper than that, and they're being called in now as part of that assessment process.
It's amazing because the general public's looking for analogies in cybersecurity. It's so complex. Like the checklist that maybe pilots have before they take off, those are developed over 20, 30 years with the designer of the network, right? People who make the B-2 bomber kind of came up with checklists and the Air Force kind of improved over time. My network and your network are all really different. I might not have the same checklist that you. It's really hard to have that common denominator. So it's crazy. So talk a little bit, please, about we have this voluntary, very complex, or I used to print out in this cybersecurity framework. In general, it's great, right?
Yeah.
You know your assets all the way to respond. But in practice, it's like you got to be a doctor. You got to be a brain surgeon to read this, like 100 pages, 100, 200, 300 findings in there. Really difficult, especially if you have a network where you don't know all that.
Right.
So what is CMMC? Why did it come about? And how did you guys get involved with that?
So this 800-171 that I was talking about, it was an ultimate failure, right? The DFARS 712 was failure. Nobody was doing it. So the DoD said, we need to do something that we can have an even playing field, right? We have a standard that we can measure people against, and we actually do it with independent third-party assessors so that we have confidence in that assessment, right? So that CMMC was kind of invented for that purpose. And then they stood up an ecosystem that had certified third-party assessors, but also tried to endorse or make sure there was a base set of knowledge out there for the people that were doing consulting in that arena. So they developed something called the Registered Provider Organization and the Registered Practitioners. And then, of course, the Certified Third-Party Assessment Organization. But they also stood up the education piece. Somebody needed to train these people. So they stood up the licensed partner publisher concept, which was organizations that could actually develop the certified curriculum. And then they have licensed training providers who are people that are authorized to actually provide the training, the certified training. Edwards decided to be all four. So we jumped in with all 4 feet, I like to say. We said, well, we're already consulting with organizations, so we'll do that. We already assessed the organization, so we can do that. And we had a great training and development organization within Edwards, and we said, so why shouldn't we be the ones training people? And I was lucky enough to find Joy and brought her in to actually lead all the CMMC training. But we were the very first licensed partner publisher, the very first licensed training provider, and we had the first approved training curriculum out there in the marketplace that we're still teaching now.
So when you teach CMMC, what do you teach? How long is the course? How much of it is can I come in as just maybe some basic knowledge of IT versus do I have to be like a former pen tester familiar with this cybersecurity framework? What's the client class like?
I'm really glad you asked that because there's so much misconception out there. First of all, the CCP or Certified CMMC Professional, it's the first basic rung of the ladder. And as such, the target audience are the people that are doing the consulting, the people who want to go on and become formal assessors, and internal IT and InfoSec at any organization that's trying to prepare their own company without having to hire a third-party consultant to help them get ready. So anyone in any of those 3 categories is the target audience for the CCP. And it's a 5-day boot camp is the way that we designed it at Edwards. There are some like community colleges that will do it over several weeks, just in the evening. So there's a bunch of different modalities. You can do it in person, you can do it virtual, instructor-led. So we're doing it virtual, instructor-led, and over the 5 days, like we start learning all about data governance. And so just the basics of data classification and how are you safeguarding that appropriately according to categories. And what is CUI, controlled unclassified information? Like, would you know it if you saw it? If you're generating it as part of a contract, how are you making sure that you have proper markings on it? So this seems really basic, but
I have a separate Slack channel for that.
you do for sharing CUI.
There you go. There you go. But no, that I make that joke. But when you come out of the military and the DoD government, secret, no foreign, top secret, top secret, blah blah blah, whatever. But when you go to Ford Motor Company, they've got classified stuff. It's not top secret, but it's like sensitive Ford. What they don't have, well, I don't want to pick on Ford. I'm talking about them, whatever. They don't have skips. They don't have facility security officers for unless they're working for the government. So I just, a lot of times people say the government is not ahead of the commercial industry when it's cyber. I'm like, yeah, they got skips. They've got fences. They've got a lot more. So do you ever see when you're teaching the class, you have to explain, yes, it's sensitive file, but it's in the same email server that you're, ordering pizza on or something like that.
Yeah. The classification and just good data governance. I mean, and I think that you and Cindy have always been, pushing the thought of data care. Mm-hmm. This is really folds into that. And we also teach the history of CMMC along with the regulations, like the DFAR 7012 that Brian referred to. That's in place now. Companies have the potential of being randomly assessed and or being prosecuted under the False Claims Act right now, even though CMMC hasn't been codified. So we teach about that. We teach about what's in 7012. There's like a 72-hour reporting period. You've been breached. There's a bunch of information separate from NIST 800-171 that's underlined. If you want to do business with the DoD, you have to say this in your contract. You're signing the contract saying that's what you're doing.
Let's go back a little bit on that. There's a 72-hour requirement to notify if you're breached. That's kind of like a hot button right now, right? We were going to try to require critical infrastructure to do that to the system, but what is a breach? When do I know that there's a breach? Does the lawyer and the board of my company? So what are some of the details on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, 7012 is specifically worried about the compromise of CUI. So really, the breach of confidentiality of the controlled unclassified.
So, okay, I lost secret data. That's a pretty easy thing to do. Yeah. Who do I have to tell?
So you have to notify your contracting officer, first of all. And you also have to potentially notify the Defense Cyber Crime Center. And then, then you have to quarantine that system if you have some sort of other kind of an incident that may have to ship off for forensics analysis and that sort of thing. But there's a lot of nuances to that. But the main thing is reporting, making sure you alert your contracting officer, you alert the Defense Cyber Crime Center if it was associated with some breach of your systems, so that they can take action.
Got it. So you talk about the history. And I think the history of CMMC is, even though it's only a couple of years, just like last decade, whatever, there has been a change. And I think it's interesting that as cyber people, we all live in this bubble of, well, of course there's 112 regulations in the DFARS and PCI's got 12 different areas and subcategories. But, when CMMC first came out, it had 5 areas, and now we're kind of down to 3. Mostly in the name of lowering the cost for the general public to comply with this. Would you guys agree with that statement?
Yeah, I mean,
so walk me through that. What's your maturity level? You're a lot closer to this than I am.
Yeah, so when CMMC first came out, so they were really trying to achieve a more of a maturity model concept. That's why maturity model is in the middle of it. There. But anyway, they came up with 5 levels. So there was some basics, cyber hygiene, which was level 1. And then there was, to level 2, and then level 3 was where you could really start processing CUI, where you could really house CUI and protect CUI. So that was a little more, good cyber hygiene, if you will. Right. And then there was level 4 and level 5, which were kind of reserved for really critical programs that were like borderline classified information, but was still unclassified CUI. If it's a weapons system with some sensitivity or something like that, they would reserve it for the programs. What they decided to do, because it was pretty complex, and they came up with CMMC 2.0. 2.0 makes it everything. But what they really did was they said, well, all of this stuff we kind of added, We don't necessarily, we think that might add costs. So they said, well, we'll just go back to 800-171 and just have those controls that we have had since 2014. Okay. And we will have 3 levels. So they have still basic hygiene, which, oh, by the way, it only has 17 controls, which doesn't sound too ominous. And it's really basic stuff. And quite frankly, it's not really, in my opinion, the 17 controls don't cover basic hygiene. But it's a good shot. And it's been in the federal acquisition regulation since like 2016. Mm-hmm. So every contract in the federal government already has those 17 controls built in. So companies have been attesting, basically by signing the contract, they're already doing their 17. And quite frankly, they're not. So, there's a lot of those controls. And then so 2.0 also allowed for, because there was a recognition that 300,000 plus defense contractors, right? And every single one of them at every level, whether it was basic, they only needed a level 1, or whether they needed a level 3, they all had to be an independent third-party assessment. 300,000 companies, and how many assessors were there? Less than 100. Not practical.
Oh, it's a greenfield opportunity, right?
Great opportunity.
That's why I'm seeing all these companies who want us to invest in their CMMC dashboards and
stuff.
Yes.
Yes.
Anything else?
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. So, you said you did a lot of small business in LA. So I'm a pizza shop. No, that's probably bad. I make nuts and bolts for the F-50.
Yeah, that's great.
It's me, my dad, and I got 100 workers. All I do is I make bolts for the F-50. Right? Mm-hmm. I'm subject to the CMMC.
Absolutely.
Right. But so is in SpaceX.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So how do you see the level 1 through 3 with the sophistication of these small business? You have a comment on that, maybe?
Well, if it's controlled unclassified information that the nuts and bolts manufacturer is working with, they've got drawings that pieced together with other drawings could amount to some information that would either steal, some of our sensitive data or potentially put our troops in harm's way. Like, we have to remember that as well. There's a human component here. And so if they have been receiving contract money for all of these years to make those nuts and bolts, and at level 2, the 110 controls is what they're being asked to implement, you look through those 110 controls, and it's achievable, and it makes good business sense. So I think that, there's a lot of complaining about, we shouldn't have to do this, but they have to do something. They have to. And what we're seeing leave the United States in the way of all of the intellectual property theft and the espionage, we have to address it somehow. So 801.71 in my mind is a really well-structured program. And if you only have 10 machine shops making 10 computers making the bolts and a die cutter, you don't have that much that you're trying to secure.
Next generation bolts made of titanium. Top secret, right? But no, but there could be shortages, right? Hey, we're going to invade, we're going to deploy F-15s to Ukraine tomorrow. We need these spare parts, right? Russian order.
Right.
That might be classified. That might be sensitive.
Right.
Yeah.
I
was just using actually the sheet metal screws as an example earlier today. You could be a sheet metal screw manufacturer that, you sell the same screws to the DoD that you sell to Home Depot. In that case, you're a supplier. You're not subject to it. You're going to sell. It's the same. You send them a box of screws. But if you have a spec that says, here's exactly the kind of screw that has to go into this particular weapon system, and it has this particular spec, well, then you're probably getting some additional information about the weapon system that they're probably considered sensitive.
What about suppliers of suppliers, right? So I make bolts for some fairing that goes on a SpaceX device that they sell to the DoD. At what point am I subject to this point?
Yeah. So the control flows down in the contract chain, right? So if you're just buying commercial product, so you're going to sell the same thing to your prime contractor that you do to Home Depot, no problems, right? You're not even subject to it. Mm-hmm. But if you're getting that requirement flowed down, now it's possible to flow down the requirement to be compliant. Let's say your prime has to be a level 2 company, but you may still, as a sub, you may only have to be a level 1. Now, everybody in the DoD supply chain has to at least be level 1. So they have to have at least done basic cyber hygiene. So the prime can take a look at it and say, I'm never going to flow controlled unclassified information down to this guy. So I can just make him be a level 1, make sure he's doing the basic stuff to protect federal contract information, but not necessarily CUI.
Got it. So let's talk about MSPs a bit, because when I think about like the Raytheons of the world, and the Allens, Northrop Grumman, I mean, those folks have security programs, they have CISOs and layers and layers of defenses against vendors and compliance standards, whatever. Right? They're going to fight this, they're going to prove it, right. But when you get down to, again, the nuts and bolts shops and stuff like that, they're working with their IT people, and their IT people are working with MSSPs, a lot of acronyms today.
Yeah.
So tell me what you guys are doing, training the MSSPs or the MSPs. And the question we really want to know is, once they kind of get up and going, do they see a reduction in intrusions? Do they see a reduction in malware and ransomware if they got basic hygiene? I'd love to hear some stories about that if you have any to share that.
I did as an MSP. The more that my clients trusted me to walk them through the risk management and they do the gap assessment and start to close those gaps, they were very much more secure. Training of the humans goes hand in hand with that, as you know, because no matter how large or expensive the firewall is, you have to have the humans understanding what their role is. We are fortunate on our team that myself and another colleague came from the MSP community. So we're using this collective experience in designing all of our curricula to, all right, so this isn't just for the implementers on site. It's not just for the assessors, but what does an MSP need to know about this? So we're helping them to understand and walk through for each of those practices. What role would they normally play if they're just a basic MSP, if they're an MSP that has a pretty decent security stack, because there's three distinct entities there. And then the ones that are more advanced, maybe even heading towards being an MSSP, their own SOC services perhaps, or a SOC 2 or some other kind of a certification. So if we're looking at it through those three different lenses, what kind of tools and resources do they need specifically? So we're working on training programs that are targeting them for them to really understand. There's one thing to be able to do the implementation of the tools really well to generate those reports, but it's another thing that there is maturity involved. You do have to have processes. You do have to have policies in place. And when the MSP is called into the interview by an assessor, when the assessor says, I see this is the policy the organization has on access control, can you tell me how you form this? And if what they say in that interview doesn't match the process that the assessor is holding in their hands, they fail, right? So it has to be extremely collaborative, really aligned. And the MSPs have to be, and this is sometimes the problem with the organization itself that's hiring the MSP, is that they wanted the MSP to be a step back, perhaps not as involved in decision-making processes, that they're only there to update the computers. But even for updating the computers, that's something that they have to be 100% aligned with when it comes to being assessed under CMMC. They have to know every bit of it. They're really representing the organization as if they're an internal IT person carrying out that role. There's shared responsibility that we're going to walk them through. And then the other thing that MSPs are really, I think, going to need some help with are, historically, MSPs are great at infrastructure diagrams, being able to identify in your network. What they're not as great at, and what we're trying to help them with, is data flow diagramming, is that they're not understanding where the data is flowing through the systems and being able to really clearly identify that, and they can't defend the scope. And defending that scope and that boundary is going to be the difference between thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars for the organization that's being assessed, right? Is it the whole company being assessed, or can we have just this business unit being assessed?
And I'm sorry, just to add to that, your question was, are they more secure, and is there empirical data around that? And the answer to that is there's no empirical data. And one of my soapbox items is always, you can be 100% compliant and be insecure. Mm-hmm. And conversely, you can be 100% secure, never, and be non-compliant. So, compliance gets you some assurance that you're doing some things that should make you more secure, right? That's what compliance is all about, conformity to a standard, right? But there's no guarantee. And it's like there's still going to be vulnerabilities. There's still going to be human error. There's still going to be, the common vulnerabilities come in, but they should have
insider threats.
But
Right?
they
There'll be a
insider
reality
threats,
winner. There'll be all that kind of stuff.
But if they do the things that they are laid out in these standards, they should have a mechanism in place to understand that attack and understand that impact of that.
What are some of the pushbacks that you've seen from customers, with end users, people who are like, hey, I've been sold to the DoD for the last 20 years, why do I got to talk about my network? How's my network? I stand behind my product. What are you seeing?
You want me to take that one?
You can always put hypothetically in front of all these comments.
Yeah, right. So, we're here directly. It's a cost thing, right? They're saying, well, why this is going to cost me money to implement these cybersecurity controls. We're like, well, why are you doing them now? Was this data not important to you? Are you really caring for your customers' data? And, as a taxpayer, I'm kind of concerned about that, right? It was, big box company X, well, maybe the companies they probably would sue me, but, are they, just because they have a security program in place doesn't mean, and they've spent money on it, doesn't mean that they're actually protecting the information the way the government wants it protected. And it's being proven out, right? The data flowing out of the U.S. is proving out that that's not happening.
Have you had anybody say, I'm just not going to do this. I'm not going to do business with the government anymore?
Yes.
Yeah, that's an interesting effect. That's a really interesting effect. It's not good for the country, but we do have a free country. And one of the things I do like about these things, we do have an open and free society, and hopefully that's an opportunity for somebody else to step in and say, well, I'll do that.
Yeah. The other thing is that MSPs are telling me that their clients are saying, well, first it was 1.0, now it's 2.0. I've been working with the government for 20 years. Believe me, there will be a 3.0 and a 4.0. And by the time they come around, I don't have to do this for another 5 years.
It'll be CMMC Omicron.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, there you go.
What are some of the, I always like to jump to technology. We invest in so many different things at Gula Tech Adventures, phishing things, adversarial emulation stuff, new threat stuff. My guess is you're really talking about people, process, procedure here. It's not like, hey, you're missing outbound, apples on your internet traffic, right? It's more basic stuff. So what are some of the technologies you have to either reconfigure, suggest, use, that sort of thing?
Well, I think a great example is VPNs, right? So, everybody's working at home and they're coming through for a VPN. Is anybody, and so they, I'm using a VPN, I'm good.
I'm secure.
Yeah. So what they didn't recognize is that the IT guys were trying to save some money. So you're only coming through the VPN to get to your internal boxes, and everything else is going out through the internet. So, you're connected to your internal stuff, and at the same time you're searching the internet and bringing all this stuff right into your internal servers.
And you have your Apple TV and Alexa
and everything else running on your home network. So configure your VPN to actually be a secure VPN. Configure the MFA to actually be true MFA, right? That you're not just doing it once and forgetting about it for a month. That you're actually using it to identify yourself. Some of the basic stuff, some stuff that's available today, and just tweaking, making sure that users can't load software on their corporate machine, things like that. Not hard to do. Technology available. Will it tick some people off? Yeah, it might. You're taking some capability away from somebody. They can't load Tetris onto their core computer anymore. So those sorts of things.
And there's some good governance platforms out there. I think that, if you could get something easy enough for a small business to understand, where they can identify all of their assets and they can link to that all of the procedures for managing those, and they can link to that all of the policies that govern them, and they can link to that the training that needs to take place for the people that are interacting with those systems. And I think that there's some solutions out there that are getting closer, but they're pretty cumbersome, and you really have to be a cybersecurity expert to manage them. So something that would be more akin to a small business, office manager of, can I maybe do this with just my IT guy giving me a little help? That would be helpful at a level 1. All those only
Where
17
is-
controls.
Where's Office 365 in this? If I'm using Office 365 and I configure it correctly, can I get level 1? Do I need third-party products?
No, you could achieve level 1 with Office 365. Your system administrators may have to do something to make sure you're using the features that are available to you.
Mm-hmm.
But you should. Yeah, you can get there. And I would argue that you could even get to level 2 with Office 365 commercial. It would take a little more work, right? But you still can do it. Yeah, there's no set formula, right? That says here's how you have to comply, right? You can do any number of things. Now it may take some, like you may have to layer on some good U.S. encryption and make sure that everything going out to the Chinese servers are actually encrypted before they go there, or whatever the case may be.
So that means, you got to look at the fine print under Zoom, right? Under Slack, under all of these big cloud, big tech kind of companies. A lot of people depend on that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And sometimes sort of the closed system, my VPN, my data center, my on-prem thing might not be as slick as Slack. I think that's something I could coin. It's not slick as Slack, right? But the reality is if I can do full key control and full providence and who's administering that, it can make the audit a lot easier.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you this. Before you got into CMMC, you did NIST work. But did you do any PCI work? Were you a PCI assessor?
No.
Okay.
I won't go into why.
It's a different animal.
It's a very different animal. But the thing is, it's almost like my good friend Jeff Mann, he's done a lot of PCI stuff. It's a different world of auditing. And I'm seeing CMMC turning into that same kind of community. So where do you see CMMC in like a couple of years?
So I think one of the biggest challenges we have as assessors in the CMMC land is the lack of uniformity on the assessment. So PCI, high trust, other kind of your regimens like that really are a lot more dictatorial about how the solution has to be configured, what your solution needs to look like. CMMC is like every other NIST standard, right? It's wide open to interpretation. So what we have to make sure is there's uniformity in the assessor community and how are we going to interpret somebody using, Office 365, corporate and configuring that and what works, what doesn't work, to actually meet the intent of the assessment or of the requirement. That's going to be the big challenge, I think, going forward.
Do the MSPs that you're training, do they see this as a cost as well, or from a business point of view, is this an opportunity for them?
Both.
Yeah.
It's a huge cost. It's a huge challenge. I would say a very small percentage of MSPs out there now could do this well. That's why I'm trying to raise the level of understanding about it. So we don't have MSPs out there saying, "Oh, we do CMMC," and then setting their clients up for the day that the assessor is going to walk in the door for the client to be told you're not even close to ready. So there's a lot of money, a lot of liability. We want to avoid it. So I would love to see some kind of, there's a little bit of discourse happening right now around the new scoping guidance for CMMC that some people is interpreting it that a managed service provider has to 100% be assessed themselves. And we see that level 2 certification if they're going to be providing services to an organization where they're performing that security. And it's not a bad idea, honestly. It's been a long time overdue that MSPs have not been legislated in some way. It's the joke in the MSP industry is that you have to have a license to do somebody's hair or paint their nails, and you don't have to have a license to manage somebody's entire infrastructure.
That's a really interesting point. So I talked to a lot of not only MSPs, but MSSPs, but then MDRs, XDRs, managed incident response, all this kind of stuff. It's all the same thing. Yeah. They're absolutely all the same in that they've got these experts they're high on, ex-CIA, DOD, blah, blah, blah. And they're great people, but they're all their individual kind of model. There's very little standards from information sharing. There's so much legality and stuff like that. Yeah. But just understanding that they were secure and keeping the data to some level would be really, really interesting thing. Yeah. A lot of them wouldn't do it.
This would be a good driver for that. The other thing is the insurance industry would be a driver for that. I think that we've seen premiums skyrocket they never should have been insuring businesses in the first place without them having, like, you can't even drive a car without going through a driver's test. So the fact that insurers were out there saying, oh, you're a business, you say you're secure, the whole self-attestation thing, now they're finding out that they're just bleeding tons of money, and they are retracing their steps and saying, well, wait a minute, now you have to show that you have X, Y, and Z before we'll insure you.
Yeah, is there a
doing that
CMMC
through the
tie-in?
MSP.
Yeah. You think there's going to be a tie-in? Have you seen any insurance providers ask for CMMC attestations, that sort of thing?
Not yet.
Because the thing I like about the insurance thing, it's almost like client-attorney privilege, right? When I tell my insurance broker, there's a sense of trust, and then if my insurance broker, and by the way, I've insured like 10 of y'all, and you're the worst, you're the best. Like that's some good feedback there.
Mm-hmm.
But to date, the industry has not. We just don't have common schemas. We don't have anything. I know this administration's working on it. We do need various standards, but we can't even agree what an incident is. That's why I was like, I forgot. So when you lose secret, that's an incident. I get that. That's very easy. But in the general public, what's an incident?
Right.
It's really, really hard to go there. I like the tie-in. If I'm going to attest the federal government, the DoD, that I'm CMMC level 1, level 2, whatever, why not get a discount on my insurance? That's not a bad idea. So, that would be good. When you just, you're out, you see people, hey, I run a small business. What do you recommend to them for security without knowing anything? Like it's kind of like, hey, what should I do to lose weight, doctor? We're in these positions as cyber experts that we get asked these questions. So kind of, what do you tell people? What kind of questions are you seeing?
For basic small business, a business managed firewall, not the one that they just install when they give you your internet, right? Managed antivirus that will update itself continuously. The training for the users so that they know that they're a target, and specifically for your industry, how would they be targeted? And that, it sounds like it's a big deal, but you can go on YouTube and you can find fabulous free training for all kinds of stuff nowadays.
So that's, I love it because that's the MSP background coming out.
Oh yeah.
And what I try to lead off with, because I'm this cybersecurity framework, I don't know what to call it. I'm very biased towards the cybersecurity framework, obviously. But I start out with identifying, do you even know what it is that's important to your business? So if you lost that information, that you would go out of business. Do you know where that is?
This is why we're a good team.
Yeah. Do you know where it is? Do you have a handle on it? And how are you protecting it? Do you even have that baseline knowledge? Because you could spend $1 million on technology, and you could be protecting the wrong stuff. We've seen a lot in some of the assessment people. Oh yeah, I got the greatest new firewall. I got this stuff going on. Yeah, but you're putting everything on your DMZ. That's important to you. And you're having your customer portals coming in through an unprotected website.
And they have no clue what data they have where.
Right.
Especially the smaller ones that have lots of interns. I have a lot of nonprofits as clients as an MSP, and they're really big on bringing interns in and any kind of free labor that they can get using their own laptops, their own Google Drives, and I think, you can't have that donor list.
Let me see how you guys react to this. So, as an industry, we don't have the get facts, get a mask like Raven has, right? Everybody's got like their own. So have you guys ever heard the Cyber Readiness Institute? So it's basically MasterCard, Microsoft. This is what they tell small business. So it's similar to what you were saying. So there's user training, teach people how phishing. They say USBs, like don't use foreign USBs. Patch your systems, which is kind of like asset management. Know where your stuff is. And the last one is strong passwords. They say two-factor. They say strong password. Yeah. I'm also in the Center for Security Technology Advisory Group, and their list is like a little bit different as well. It's a little bit more akin to like the NIST cybersecurity framework. They got these levels, 0 through 2 or 1 through 3, if you like CPM and not computer or whatever. But the point is, everybody's got their own. Like, Melissa, how do you think we can break through as an industry and try to get people to think about, their data, taking care of business, being responsible for this stuff?
Yeah. Well, I think that's all I work for. So this cybersecurity framework lays out pretty simple, right? It's identify what you have, that's important. Protect what you have, that's important. Understand whether or not detect something that's gone bad. Be able to detect when you're losing the things that are valuable to you. and then have a plan to respond and recover from. It's just simple as that.
And
it doesn't have to be highly
everyone,
technical,
right? It could be your home.
Yeah.
It could be a church.
Yeah.
A lot of people, they volunteer for IT in their churches. Practice the cybersecurity ground. Anything, bring it up, right?
Right.
It works. That
it
works great. What you say, right?
You don't have to go down into the technical controls. Just the very basic concepts that are in the foundational level of the framework. It's just it's just a cybersecurity program. It's a way of thinking about it. You have to know what's important to you.
When we taught the NIST cybersecurity framework before in my previous job, we would use the example of a home. Mm-hmm. And how would you identify what's important in your home and valuable? And we walked through the whole framework that way. So that a small business owner could relate that to their own office and start to think about it in business terms. But if you make it more personal at the outset, it's easier.
Yeah, definitely.
So I like to try to map cyber to science fiction. So I don't know what kind of science fiction background you guys like, but this. Oh, so you're giving
I'm going to be terrible at this game.
Oh my God! No, I'm not some hacker.
I'm a hitchhiker's guide to the galaxy.
You like that kind of stuff. All right. So, what about? Are there things that you've seen in the movies? In the Jetsons, Star Trek, Star Wars, all these new movies from Marvel. Do you see cybersecurity in those things? You kind of go, yeah, that's not the way it works, right? Or even just in fiction, right? NCIS on TV, right? So anything that pops out that.
Oh yeah, one of my things that just sets me off, right, is somebody just banging away on the keyboard. They've hacked this system. Oh, I got him. It doesn't happen that way. Somebody just banging away on the keyboard and magically, we've stopped them from attacking the system.
What do you think that does to our industry?
Well, I have another pet peeve, right? And the market, anytime our marketing team comes to me and there's anything that has a hoodie on it, mm-hmm. or if they have ones and zeros flipping across the screen,
like the Matrix,
I go off, right? And so that's definitely a pet peeve. It's like it is not all about the ones and zeros. And it's not about some really smart guy in a basement with a hoodie on hacking away on a computer. It's about everybody. It's about, the mom and pop that are running the grocery store and how well they secure their cash registers. And do they leave the money in their cash registers? It's the equivalent of that, right? It's like, don't leave the money in the cash register, put it in the safe.
I definitely agree with that. The face of cybersecurity, this last 6 months, we have people being arrested by Russia in Russia for ransomware. We've got long lines of criminal pipeline, right? We've got people testifying before Congress because SolarWinds. If this is all coming from books that happened, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
This is stuff's kind of it's
well, kind of actually some of the ransomware stuff and things are. I started my career in 1984, and some of the first papers that were written, first papers I was given to read, which were written in the 70s, were like the Eagles, a paper called The Eagles Up with Roger Shell. I wrote that. He was one of my mentors back in the day. But he wrote that at the Naval Postgraduate School. And it was all about attacking a mainframe by injecting malicious software. Red Star software was the favorite thing to do stuff in it. And having it on a reel tape and having it loaded and convincing the admin to load it. And that was it. And then they took down the system.
And he's like, genius.
And then, so the new attacks are just modern versions of that.
Variations of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you, when you talk to your clients and you're teaching them about CMMC, how often do you try to make it real? Like, Vladimir Putin's going to get in your system. PLA, China, going to get in your system. Because that's really what we're doing. Can you make it real?
I think that's too far. It's too far and intangible for them to understand that. It's a lot more. The best example I can give is somebody in their industry or in their region that was in the news yesterday, and walk them through exactly how that happened. Because when
being compromised by China, Russia, ransomware, something like
any of them. I think that people, they need to have an example of like actually It's like a lot of people didn't believe COVID existed until one of their family members came down with it. And so you have to have a real life example of something that's tangible to them. And the more personal you can make it, the better.
What's your opinion on ransomware? Should you pay the ransom? Should you clean things up? Should you have just been protected in the first place? What do you tell the people?
Obviously protected in the first place, I think. But, it's hard for me to make a judgment call for somebody else because I've seen businesses go completely under, even after they paid the ransom because they just didn't get the data back. But I can't make that decision for somebody else. I would hope that we would all be strong enough to band together and say none of us are going to pay anymore. But you can't force somebody to lose their whole livelihood.
Cheap thing. It's like everybody wants to be a moral question, but then when you're running that business, it's like I could be back up and running tomorrow. Okay. It's different.
I guess I would just say, but please don't pay the ransom until you have somebody standing there that can help you. Once they give you the key back, to then get them out of your system, so that doesn't just happen again in a month. Or they come back and remonetize you.
Absolutely. All right. I will press you for just one science fiction or technology show. What is something you've seen on TV?
I love Mr. Robot.
Mr. Robot.
Excellent. I love Mr. Robot. I think it's one of the more realistic, like this is how society can actually come to its needs.
Yep.
Yeah. I thought it was wonderful. And through the whole thing, my fiance was saying, is that real? Can they do that? Most of the time I was like, yeah, it's actually pretty real. The whole going off on his mental condition was a bit of a stretch, but I loved that.
I think a lot of people in the cyber industry would put that up there as a really good example of most of the stuff was good. Another one was the girl with the dragon tattoo, like that. Yeah, when you're doing that kind of surveillance on somebody, you see their desktop in real time. That's basically, remote access Trojan and that sort of thing. Brian, how about you? Anything you've seen that?
Yeah, so I tend to flip past them mostly, but I have seen the girl with the dragon tattoo. That was a good one. Any of them that touch a little closer to real surveillance, and that sort of thing, or treat it differently than say a CSI or whatever the show is. Like, I don't even watch them anymore. NCIS, who they're just banging away on the keyboard and catching the bad guy, and they can just get their computer genius to track them down. It just doesn't work that way, so I just can't watch the show. So I typically if it's something like hackers or something like that, I flip past it. I don't even watch it.
I'd like to see more examples of con men that are using social engineering and how that relates in the digital world, cyber world. I think that that's important because a lot of people don't understand the way that the door got opened in the first place was being fooled or tricked into doing something where they thought they were doing good. It's an age-old story of the con man, and now that it's translated into this whole other world where people are totally unsuspecting and don't realize it's like they have a loaded gun and they were never taught how to manage that loaded gun. Just by going on and doing their normal day-to-day job, they don't realize what damage they can cause.
Yeah, you asked earlier who the face of cybersecurity should be. I think it should be somebody's 85-year-old grandmother. Right? The victims.
That's excellent. As part of the CMMC training, do you guys when you do the user education, talk about your awareness, phishing, social engineering, that
it's
sort of
required.
Stuff?
So the cool thing I like, since I'm so into the awareness and training part of cybersecurity and the human element, it's my specialty, as well as insider threat, and those are actually called in as required practices in CMMC. It's not until level 2, which is unfortunate. I think it should be basic at level 1 for everybody. But it's security awareness training starting with, and then there is specific tailored training for people that have any kind of security role. So training specific to their role. And then there's insider threat training, which is awesome because this is the nation's defense that we're talking about. And all the sensitive information that we're worried about, espionage has a role, fraud has a role, IT sabotage, all of those things. It's like, you don't realize, and then if you take on top of that, we have this weird juxtaposition happening where the False Claims Act is being used for the first time for cybersecurity. It's being held up by CMMC as an example of this is what can happen. 3 times the contract award, anywhere from $12,000 to $18,000 per infraction.
So I get awarded a $10 million contract in the Air Force. I'm liable for $30 million 3 times the contract award if I falsify that.
If you knowingly and egregiously are going to try to circumvent the controls that you say that you're doing, a whistleblower on your own, in your own company, could take that to the Department of Justice and they get 30% of the penalty that has been levied against them.
I had no idea.
30%.
That's quite the incentive. That's,
So it flips the insider
we
threat
are
on
living
it.
in 1984, right?
It's created a whole new cottage industry.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, there's actually third-party companies out there seeking, when they hear a rumor about a company that's not doing what they're supposed to be doing, they will act like the CIA does when they're trying to flip somebody and try to get an internal person to help them bring it to the Department of Justice in a way that's defensive.
I just think it's really interesting. There's all these cottage industries out there that are actually big industries. Look at the threat feeds that you can get, where you can see, well, based on this malware, based on this DNS activity, I know that they have this kind of malware at this company. Gee, they're a government contractor, which is not unlike when, what was the one, there was a pornographic site that got compromised. All their use, like that kind of thing. If you're from a, commercial contractor and you're going to a pornographic site, at work, you're probably not, you're probably on that list as well, right? So there's all this data out there that you can profile these companies. That's insane. That's insane. Yeah. I find that, that's just like a science fiction movie.
It's very intriguing.
It's science fact, unfortunately.
Excellent. So great. So if people want to contact you guys, I'll put your LinkedIn profile show notes. Right. But where can people reach you? Are you guys on LinkedIn?
We are.
Do you speak? You're coming to a training course near you, right?
Brian has been going all over the United States. It's been quite fun. Yeah.
We're actually going to be speaking down in Fort Lauderdale. Joy will be speaking
I get to present at RSA this year. It's the first time, and I'm super excited about that. Yeah. So, and I'm actually presenting on the False Claims Act and insider threat.
We'll be there in June.
In June.
And we're speaking at the Hack Report event that the NISI and Dreamport organizations are sponsoring.
Excellent.
So we're going to be down there speaking and actually running our class down there as well.
Phenomenal. Well, Joy, Brian, Happy New Year. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks for having us. I appreciate it.
So this is Ron Gula signing out with another episode of Gula Tech Cyber Fiction. Thanks for joining us today.